The Washington Post, 24th of July 2023, anxiety is brought on by the loud echoes of Beijing's irrational and authoritarian attitudes in Singapore. The fact that the Chinese in Singapore are unthinkingly emulating hegemonic China is a problem for the world. President Xi Jinping has outlined an ambitious vision for ethnic Chinese communities abroad to give shape to a powerful joint force for advancing the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation as China attempts to increase its global power. Beijing has made promoting these communities as a platform for China's geopolitical goals into a slogan, frequently doused in a trite language like creating a shared future. However, critics claim that Beijing is fostering split loyalties and their potentially unstable effects across Southeast Asia, home to more than 80% of the ethnic Chinese population outside China and Taiwan. This is because Beijing wants to include citizens of other nations in its vision. In Singapore, a multicultural city-state with a large ethnic Chinese community that is becoming more supportive of Beijing, worries are particularly acute. Singapore was one of only 3 nations in a 2022 Pew Research Center study of 19 nations that saw China and Xi in a positive light. Singapore was the only country to regard China more favorably than it did the United States, according to a study performed in Singapore, South Korea, and the Philippines and published in June by the Eurasia Group Foundation. In Singapore, only 49% of respondents had a favorable opinion of the US, while 56% had a good view of China. The multiracial social cohesion that is the cornerstone of Singapore's success would be shattered, according to Bilahari Koshikan, a former permanent secretary of Singapore's foreign ministry. If too many Chinese Singaporeans are foolish enough to subscribe to Xi's version of the China dream, Singapore's success will be destroyed. It cannot be put back together after being destroyed. The government of Singapore has warned its ethnic Chinese community against hostile foreign influence operations and emphasized a separate Singapore Chinese identity. Legislation prohibiting foreign meddling in domestic politics was passed and put into force last year. However, the Chinese Communist Party's (CCP) propaganda on essential subjects, such as the United States' involvement in the region and China's internal politics, is already well established in Singapore, notably in a prestigious newspaper in that language that the government of Singapore has long supported. The leading newspaper, Lian Hsiao, exemplifies the transformation in perceptions of Beijing. An analysis of more than 700 Lian Hsiao articles through 2022 and early 2023 by The Washington Post and the Australian Strategic Policy Institute found that its reporting, once a reflection of Singapore's careful neutrality between China and the United States, now routinely repeats some of Beijing's most vehement lies, such as denying evidence of rights abuses in Xinjiang and alleging that protests in Hong Kong and mainland China were instigated by foreign forces. In addition, the paper has published regular opinion pieces from at least 2 CCP officials since 2016 without identifying their political affiliation, merely referring to them as China affairs commentators. Deng Qingbo, one of the columnists, is the head of the Hunan Province's Cyberspace Administration Office's Online Propaganda and Commentary Division. Deng Songquan, the other columnist, is a member of the CCP's committee at Huzhou College in Zhejiang Province and has held several positions in the Zhejiang Education Department. Another columnist, Hong Kong-based Sing Yunchao, sometimes publishes similar columns in Lian Hsiao and the China Daily, obfuscating the distinction between the privately owned Singaporean newspaper and the Chinese state-run media. Singapore keeps military solid and economic links with Washington, and its close economic ties with Beijing as part of its carefully calculated neutrality between the United States and China. While U.S. Navy ships often make port visits in Singapore, the city-state purchases weapons from the country and trains its troops there. In the meantime, following Prime Minister Li Shenglong's visit to China last spring, Singapore and China formally strengthened their bilateral relationship, reinforcing a free trade agreement, environmental cooperation, and telecommunications exchanges. According to academics, Beijing views Southeast Asia as a crucial area of influence. It has been stepping up its public diplomacy and media presence there as part of a massive effort under Xi, with ethnic Chinese populations being a primary focus. According to a draft of the law, China's legislature is about to approve a patriotic education law that aims to advance Beijing's messages and Xi Jinping thought, including by leveraging the influence of overseas Chinese organizations that should play to their respective advantages. According to Chong Jian, an associate professor at the National University of Singapore and a non-resident scholar at Carnegie, China, China's messaging serves two purposes. It aims to improve its reputation and programs while limiting Washington's influence in Southeast Asia by instilling the perception that the U.S. is dangerous, provocative, and destabilizing. China Radio International, which transmits in most Southeast Asian languages in addition to Chinese, and Chinese State Television, which is available in both Chinese and English, are widely available across Southeast Asia. Beijing also fosters content-sharing partnerships with regional media companies by pushing its official news agency, Xinhua. Chinese firms or individuals with significant business ties to China have acquired Malaysian Chinese language newspapers to appropriate overseas Chinese communities as vectors of influence abroad, according to Albert Zhang, an analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's International Cyber Policy Centre. This focus on traditional media organizations complements targeted misinformation campaigns on social media. Aside from these overt actions, China's overwhelming economic might has become a reason to comply with Beijing's demands, eroding Singapore's long-standing rules against taking sides. For instance, Lianhe Xiaobao has gained a reliance on its readership for both growth and advertising because of its uncommon access to Chinese viewers for a foreign daily. According to conversations with 10 former and current reporters who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss matters freely, the newspaper's leadership has emphasized access over critical coverage because it is reluctant to take the chance of being barred from the Chinese market by the nation's censors. Smaller online publications that rely on Chinese social networking apps like WeChat for readers and advertising also offer financial incentives. An editor of a Chinese-language online magazine in Singapore acknowledged using self-censorship to maintain access to the app by avoiding political subjects and favoring messaging supporting China. The editor claimed that being blocked had a double cut, harming reading and advertising. Gosin Tech, the editor of Lianhe Xiaobao, responded to inquiries from the Post by claiming that his publication is objective, neutral, and fact-based and that content is not chosen based on political leanings. According to Go, the opinion section is intended to cover a broad spectrum of views. The newspaper does not want to discard certain views out of hand solely based on the columnist's background. He said that only the newspaper's editorials represent the newspaper's official positions. Go stated, Lianhe Xiaobao, to the best of its ability, validates the background of every writer while appreciating how they choose to describe themselves. He continued, in fact, we may not be dancing to the tune of the West when we report on some issues. But it seems unduly hasty and arbitrary to label us as a pro-CCP media. In 1983, two competing Chinese-language newspapers merged to form Lianhe Xiaobao. Singapore's first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, backed the merger. With English replacing Chinese as the primary language of teaching in schools, Lee was concerned about the survival of Chinese-language media. It is in Singapore's interest as a nation to maintain at least one high-quality Chinese-language newspaper, and that paper is Xiaobao, he stated in a speech honoring the paper's anniversary in 2003. We must work hard to promote this because it is a national project. The newspaper is one of Singapore's 3 primary vernacular publications, with each one catering to a country's dominant ethnic group, Chinese, Malay, or Indian. Most of Singapore's 5.4 million residents are multilingual and fluent in Mandarin, Malay, Dam, and English. Lianhe Xiaobao was unique in that it catered to 2 audiences, those in China and Singapore. Higher-ranking CCP officials shared Xiaobao's reporting and commentary as China started to open up in the 1980s under Deng Xiaoping's leadership. The newspaper first became accessible in Beijing hotel bookshops in 1993, and 2 years later, it launched online. It is still one of the few foreign news websites in Chinese that are available in China. We call it one newspaper, 2 countries, Lim Jim-kun, the paper's former editor-in-chief who worked at Xiaobao for over 3 decades until retiring in 2011, said. We are aware that China values us because we provide a service they do not. For them, we become a window. While the paper's presence in China expanded, its circulation in Singapore slowly decreased along with reduced Mandarin proficiency, particularly among the young. While establishing a brand with material millennials and Gen Zers produced, the publication has attempted to draw a new digital audience by promoting video content and Facebook Live presentations. However, its subscription base has continued to decline. According to corporate documents, the circulation of Xiaobao in Singapore decreased from 187,900 in 2015 to 144,000 in 2020. In 2021, the parent company of Xiaobao, Singapore Press Holdings, broke out its media division into a privately held trust called SPH Media due to declining industry earnings. This division included the English-language Straits Times and other local papers. Public access to circulation data and other financial statistics has been discontinued. For the magazine, having access to the Chinese market has become essential. According to census data, there are almost twice as many Mandarin speakers in Singapore as there are on Xiaobao. This access is monetized by advertising and paid advertorials from Chinese and other companies looking to market to Chinese consumers. Due in part to its long-standing close ties with the government, which has always maintained strict control over the local media, Xiaobao continues to have a sizable influence in Singapore. High-ranking Singaporeans, including the current Prime Minister, attend events honoring the paper's anniversaries. The Reuters Institute also gives the publication high marks for reader trust. SPH Media still holds a stranglehold over print news in Singapore despite declining readership. When the newspaper's main WeChat page was blocked at the height of the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, the Xiaobao reporters claimed that a definite move toward Beijing had accelerated. It's still not reachable. Unknown to why, it was perceived as a warning that additional social media sites, such as the official Xiaobao website and its account on Weibo, a significant Chinese social media network, would be blocked. According to multiple reporters, editors hide crucial stories from the Chinese edition of the newspaper's website, which is distinct from the one available in Singapore. According to several current and former reporters, the newspaper's senior leadership's top emphasis changed to avoiding being restricted in China. One of the newspaper's journalists commented, "It underscores everything we do." According to the reporters, defending that access has impacted the paper's editorial policy more generally, particularly its reporting for Singaporean readers. Between the censorship in China and Singapore, the journalist in the report claimed, "We are doubly trapped." The Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai agreed to an exclusive interview with the publication in December 2021. Peng said on her Weibo account that a former senior CCP official had forced her into having sex before she vanished from view. The only time Peng has been seen or heard from directly since she made the accusation is during the 6-minute Xiaobao interview, in which she denied having been sexually assaulted and said she was living freely. Several journalists said the paper was hand-selected to spread the party narrative. It was more likely to be believed by international audiences than by a Chinese state media institution. A former reporter claimed it put Xiaobao in the light of helping the CCP say things. At that point, you could see the connection between the Chinese government's sporadic and limited access to foreign media and Xiaobao's self-promotion as a diplomatic channel and translator of Chinese thought. We might not do so to the West's tune when we report on particular subjects. But it seems unduly hasty and arbitrary to label us as a pro-CCP media. More recently, the paper has adopted Beijing's perspective on issues such as last year's blank paper demonstrations against COVID-19 lockdowns and CCP rule, as well as coverage of the Chinese surveillance balloon, shot down by the US in February, where stories routinely imply that the US response was unreasonable and a sign of decline. Xiaobao also collaborates with a Chinese firm accused of supporting the violation of human rights. Xiaobao began collaborating on digitalization projects with SenseTime in late 2022. SenseTime has been sanctioned by the US government for using facial recognition technology against the Uyghur ethnic group. The agreement, according to Go, editor of Xiaobao, is for a year and is designed to explore ways of using AI technology to improve visual content presentation and user experience, he added, noting that Xiaobao has no wish to be embroiled in US-China contests. Sens Hofstede, a research fellow at the Clingendael Institute in the Netherlands, said that the Beijing-friendly impression Lianhe Xiaobao gives its readers might lead the Chinese audience to believe Singapore is more PRC-friendly than is justified by its US-centered security policy. The modifications to the paper coincide with Beijing's objectives being more openly promoted by Beijing's new ambassador to Singapore. Sun Haiyan comes from the International Liaison Department, a branch of the CCP that handles connections with political parties rather than the Foreign Ministry, and was granted her credentials in 2022. She quickly created the ambchina.sg Facebook page after accepting her position. She updates it at least once per day. After reviewing her public posts from 2022, the Post found that she tended to interact more with Chinese Singaporeans, Chinese language media, and Chinese associations than with members of other ethnic groups. One of Sun's first engagements was a meeting with a group of Chinese language online publications where, according to an editor present, She reportedly requested that they refrain from discussing sensitive subjects like China's actions in Xinjiang and Tibet, where the UN discovered evidence of extensive human rights abuses and forced assimilation. According to a person acquainted with the conversation, Sun advised an editor at SPH Media, the parent firm of Xiaobaof, that it should support the dissemination of favorable narratives about China. A pro-China message that does not distinguish between the Chinese Communist Party state, Chinese culture, and Chinese ethnicity leads to confusion over self-identification and where loyalties should lie, especially at a time when friction between the PRC, the US, and other US friends and allies in the region is increasing, according to Chang of the National University of Singapore. The Chinese embassy expressed its admiration for Singapore's multi-religious and multi-ethnic society in a letter to the Post. It claimed to be in regular contact with a diverse array of local communities, claiming connections to Indian and Malay MPs. According to the embassy, public relations and media affairs constitute an important part of the works of Sun. Sun will reportedly resign from her position at the end of the month to accept a promotion to deputy minister at the International Liaison Department, according to Lianhe Xiaobao on Saturday. She would be China's youngest deputy minister in charge of foreign affairs. A request for comment on her departure or new position was not met with any response from the Chinese embassy in Singapore. According to multiple people familiar with the situation who spoke anonymously due to diplomatic sensitivities, the Singaporean government has carefully examined Sun's outreach. China's wider influence is also causing the administration more and more alarm. At a reception celebrating the Lunar New Year on February 5, Home Affairs Minister Khairul Muhammad addressed a clan association, one of the groups founded under British rule to encourage Chinese immigrants. He asked the gathering to support preserving a Singaporean Chinese culture so our people remain anchored. Assist the government in ensuring that only Singaporeans can decide on policy. A straightforward remark from a government that typically avoids criticizing China to preserve relations with Beijing was made by Shah Muhammad in his appeal. It came after the Prime Minister's Mandarin speech at the National Day rally in August, in which he claimed that social media posts, namely those on WeChat, WhatsApp, and Telegram, have the ulterior aim of swaying Singaporeans to pick sides. Nevertheless, Beijing's sphere of influence is encircling some Singaporean Chinese organizations. The 10th Conference for Friendship of Overseas Chinese Organizations, the first one held since the pandemic, was attended by representatives of 3 clan organizations, including the largest, Tao Chu Poi Tai Pihaequan. Along with some 500 overseas Chinese from 130 different countries, several Singapore organizations, such as the charity Sanshe Medical Institution and the Singapore-China Business Association, attended. Xian Shi Taifeng, the chairman of China's United Front Work Department, which organizes Beijing's influence efforts, welcomed them. According to state media, the occasion served to knit the giant Chinese family together. Requests for reaction from the Singapore delegations that attended the conference went unanswered. According to researchers, such conferences are a component of China's more comprehensive United Front policy, in which non-state players support political activities to promote CCP viewpoints, discredit rivals, and gather intelligence. In his remarks, Xi stressed the unique advantage Chinese living abroad had in advancing the greatness of the Chinese nation. A lot of United Front appeals cross over to an appeal to Chinese ethnic nationalism, said Jerry Groot, a senior lecturer at the University of Adelaide in Australia who studies United Front activities and the contribution of overseas Chinese to it. Friendship associations are designed to strengthen individuals' emotional ties to China on the one hand and to enable the United Front Department to use those ties, among others, as levers to support the objectives of the Communist Party, whether political, social, or economic. The elderly Chinese, who were taught in Mandarin and felt as though they had lost their place in a predominantly Anglophone Singapore, are the ones most susceptible to Beijing's messages, analysts and locals said. Someone who claims that her parents, who are in their 70s and 80s, hold extreme pro-China sentiments claim that the CCP has turned into a fictional hero. Even though it isn't their identity, she said that being a Chinese national had become their entire identity. In an email to the Post, Singapore's Ministry of Communications and Information representative stated that the island nation does not choose sides between the United States and the People's Republic of China, but upholds consistent principles. According to an internal government survey, 86% of Singaporeans support the non-partisan policy, with only 4% believing China should be the nation's primary ally. Singapore's efforts to strengthen its Singaporean Chinese identity have increased. The Singapore Chinese Cultural Center, a charity, was founded to support local Chinese culture. It has a permanent exhibition that is photogenic for Instagram and highlights regional food, dialects, and traditions distinct from those of China. The Singaporean government provides the majority of the funding. According to Lo Ziwei, the center's chief executive, we were set up with a particular purpose in mind, to highlight the distinctiveness of the Chinese culture and Chinese community in Singapore. We have a common ancestor with the Chinese people, but it is evident that many of us in the group have evolved along various trajectories despite this.